Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going on a seriously fascinating, kind of cinematic journey. We're starting in the smog-choked, cobbled streets of Victorian London and traveling all the way into the digital ether of modern virtual reality. It's an exploration of the human experience of loss. We're looking at how we process it, how we put it on public display, and how an immense historical tragedy actually birthed customs that literally changed the human brain. Let's get right into it.
To really understand where we're going, we first have to ground ourselves in the overwhelming, frankly terrifying reality of the 1800s. I love how historian Catherine Arnold puts it. She says, in shocking reality, London was more necropolis than metropolis. The barrier between the living and the dead was incredibly thin back then. Death wasn't just some distant possibility, it was an inescapable physical presence in everyday urban life. And this was all driven by crazy rapid urbanization, overcrowding, and some truly horrifying epidemics.
Okay, let's dive into this. The data here puts that necropolis reality into stark perspective. Get this, by 1842, the life expectancy for a professional man? Only 30 years. And if you were a laborer, just 17. 17! But maybe the most tragic part is the infant mortality rate. Half of all children born in the early 19th century died before they even reached age 10. So, you know those seemingly bizarre, super obsessive mourning traditions of the Victorians? They weren't just quirky fashion statements. They were deeply, desperately grounded in sheer, inescapable human tragedy.
Section 1. The Spectacle of Death, when grief became a public display. Now you know the rule, right? Wherever there's a massive, universal human need, a whole industry is bound to pop up right behind it. And honestly, nobody set the standard for this quite like Queen Victoria. Her incredibly elaborate, literally lifelong mourning for her husband, Prince Albert, kicked off a massive cultural shift. She was essentially the absolute trendsetter for mourning rituals. Because of her influence, a crazy new rule emerged in high society. To mourn publicly meant you had to mourn expensively. Your grief was no longer just this private, internal feeling. No, it became a full-on public exhibition.
Section 2. The Business of Burials, Commercializing the Cemetery.
So, with this new mandate to mourn expensively combined with an actual literal shortage of space to bury people in these booming cities, a highly profitable, massive landscape of death emerged. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact tension of that era. On one hand, you have places like the lush, beautifully landscaped Highgate Cemetery. This was part of the Magnificent Seven, garden cemeteries built by commercial companies to lure wealthy clients out of those putrid, overcrowded churchyards. But then, on the flip side, you have that biting, satirical sketch by the famous architect Augustus Pugin. If you look closely at the pillars he drew, he is absolutely roasting the blatant commercialization of these new spaces. He's stamping them with phrases like "ready money only." It's literally the ultimate intersection of profound bereavement and big business.
And you know, this intense commercialization bled directly into the funeral itself. This pricing comparison from a Victorian household guide reveals a really stark financial divide. For £3 and 5 shillings, you could get your basic elm coffin, a carriage, maybe a couple of attendants. But for the wealthy, a £53 spectacle. That premium package bought you a whole hearse pulled by 4 horses, completely covered in velvet, 14 men acting as pages, and, get this, 23 rich ostrich feathers. Undertakers literally designed these tiered packages to squeeze every single drop of commercial opportunity out of grieving families, no matter their social class.
Consider the grand parade-like funeral of Mr. George Odger in 1877. This shows you exactly what that high-end spectacle looked like out on the streets. Honestly, this wasn't just about saying a quiet goodbye. This was about achieving what they called the good death. Having a massive parade-like funeral surrounded by onlookers was considered the absolute ultimate reward for the deceased. It was a spectacular public performance. It showed the whole world just how much the departed was loved, while totally flexing the surviving family's wealth and status at the same time.
Section 3. Rules of Victorian Mourning, the strict etiquette of grief. Okay, let's zoom in from that macro scale of cemeteries and street parades, right down to the intimate, incredibly rigid social rules that dictated everyday life. A wealthy widow's wardrobe followed a timeline that was strictly enforced. For the first full year, she was expected to wear entirely monochromatic raven or drab fabrics, without a single ounce of shine. This was a style famously known as widow's weeds. Then, as she moved into year 2, there was a very gradual lightening. The solid black would slowly be swapped out for eggplant, mauve, and dark gray. And let me tell you, failing to follow these rules was a massive social misstep. People would actually gossip that your marriage must have been invalid if you didn't mourn correctly.
Section 4. Letters edged in black, the most intimate artifact.
Zooming in even further from the close, imagine you're sitting at home over a customized cup of morning tea, writing a letter. Now, what's really interesting about this is the visual language of these letters. The stark difference between thick and thin borders wasn't just some arbitrary design choice. A really thick black border immediately signaled to the person opening it that the loss was either super recent or that the person who died was an immediate family member, like a child. Over the passing months and years, that black border would literally physically shrink on the page, perfectly mirroring the fading stages of the writer's own grief.
The whole physical experience of writing on this paper was deeply, deeply intentional. They used this high-quality, thick cream paper. They swapped out the usual red or gold wax seals for black wax, and they wrote these elegant lines using steel pens. And this stationery served a highly practical purpose, too. It essentially warned the letter carrier of its somber contents so they'd handle it carefully. Plus, it gave the recipient a crucial visual warning, basically saying, hey, you might want to sit down in private before you break this seal. The physical paper itself was this tangible, literal manifestation of sorrow.
Section 5. The healing power of ink, the psychology of expressive writing. So the crucial point is that this is exactly where our story pivots from history right into modern science. The Victorians intuitively relied on this expressive writing to just survive an era of crazy high mortality, right? But modern researchers have actually proven the massive physiological and psychological benefits behind it. Expressive, guided writing about trauma doesn't just help you process your feelings mentally. It literally physically lowers your blood pressure, strengthens your immune system, helps you sleep better, and dramatically increases your long-term resilience. We're talking over 200 research studies that completely back this up.
I absolutely love this quote from researchers Pennebaker and Evans. They write, "Translating emotional experience into words may be changing the way it is organized in the brain." Think about that for a second. When you write down a concrete, authentic narrative of a trauma you've experienced, giving it a clear beginning, middle, and end, you actually free up cognitive resources. You physically alter your brain tissue. You are transforming yourself from being this helpless victim of tragedy into a powerful, observing narrator who takes back the authorship over their own life. It's incredible. The Victorians were literally healing their brains with every single stroke of the pen.
Section 6. The future of grief, from physical to digital.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the world we live in now. Because that deep human need to heal, to connect, and to process loss, it hasn't gone away at all. It's just evolved. And that brings us to the modern era, beautifully mapped out by what researchers call the hybrid grief model of virtual mourning. Today, people aren't just relying on thick black-edged paper. They're actually logging into virtual reality platforms like VR chat. Inside these deeply immersive digital spaces, people are using avatars to maintain what psychologists call continuing bonds with the people they've lost. Sure, it looks a whole lot different than a physical garden cemetery, but the emotional authenticity, it is exactly the same. It is this incredibly dynamic, highly participatory way for a brand new generation to navigate the exact same timeless human sorrow.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to end on today. We've gone from elaborate horse-drawn hearses to thick black stationery, all the way to digital avatars in virtual reality. The tools completely change, but that fundamental human need to remember absolutely remains. So, how will you memorialize your own losses in the digital age? What will your digital footprint leave behind as a memorial for the future? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer through the history, science, and the very fascinating future of grief. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and as always, keep asking the big questions.